Hey everyone. So quick show of hands, who here thinks that the speakers that come with TVs are less than adequate? Yeah, me too. So it used to be back in the day, if you wanted sound that was better than just your standard television, you had to go with a big AV receiver and speakers all over the floor, behind you, on the walls, whatever. It was big, bulky, hard to set up, hard to be secretive. You had wires going everywhere. Well, a few years ago, I'm sure as you know, we had the introduction of the soundbar, and it really is a great idea. You know, it's a cleaner package, it's a quick and easy setup. And in the early days, the soundbars weren't really comparable to what you would have back in the good old days with AV receivers, but they've come a long way. And today I want to show you guys the JBL Bar 3.1, which is a prime example of one of those sound bars that's come a long way. All right, so as always, we're going to talk about what's included. We'll take a look at some of the specs and the features, and then I'll share with you guys kind of my overall opinion for the product. So first, let's talk about what's included. Obviously, you've got two speakers. You have the sound bar and the wireless subwoofer. You also have two power adapters, one for each speaker. You get a auxiliary cable, audio cable, 3.5 millimeter, and you get a HDMI cable, which is kind of nice, and I'll explain later kind of how that comes in handy. And the last piece is there are two small little cubes that you can use for mounting this to the wall. And the way it works is it's essentially kind of a keyhole slot system, and the slots are on the back of the soundbar. So simply screw the little cubes into the wall, plop the soundbar down, you're good to go. So pretty clean and easy setup, and that's what you get with the Bar 3.1. Okay, now let's talk about specs and the features. As you could probably guess by the name, the Bar 3.1, the idea is you have three different channels of audio. You have a dedicated center speaker, you have a left and a right, and then the point one is the wireless subwoofer. And the idea behind that dedicated center speaker is that it gives you a more accurate sound as far as dialogue and that sort of thing, as well as with the dedicated left and right that aren't trying to kind of power that center dialogue aspect. You get a broader sense of movement across the screen, and just for that more cinematic effect. The system has 450 watts of power, and I'm not quite sure how that power is divided between the bar and the subwoofer, but regardless, however they do it, it's done very well because as we'll talk about later, the sound that comes out of this is extremely loud. The wireless sub has a 10-inch woofer, downward firing, and it is very deep and creates some amazing amount of bass. The soundbar itself does have quite a bit in the way of connections. You have three HDMI inputs, and those are all HDCP 2.2, so they are supporting 4K connectivity. And you also have an HDMI ARC output, and I think that's why JBL made the decision to include an HDMI cable with this package. So the idea with that is, let's say you have a cable box, a PlayStation, and some type of streaming Roku or something. You can basically feed each of those HDMI cables into the soundbar, and then with that HDMI ARC output, you can just send one line to your TV, which depending on how you kind of have your system set up would give you a more clean setup. From an audio perspective, you have one digital or optical audio input, as well as one auxiliary 3.5 millimeter input. So whether you know, your TV supports optical audio, most of them do today, but plenty of options for how you want to connect an audio device to the Bar 3.1. Last is of course Bluetooth. The no soundbar today would be complete without Bluetooth, and the Bar 3.1 does support that. The last feature I wanted to talk about before we get into my opinion on the system is it's called JBL Sound Shift, and it's not something I've used personally, but the idea behind it is there's a little button on the remote that you can flip, click, whatever, and it essentially changes the audio feed from, let's say, your TV to a mobile device. So I'm not quite sure how useful that would be. I haven't used it, so obviously it wasn't useful for me. But if you're someone that I guess kind of likes to flip back and forth between maybe audio streaming, Pandora or something on your phone to what's actually being displayed on the TV, then that's certainly an option for you. All right, so now I want to talk to you guys just about kind of my opinions on the Bar 3.1. And just as a quick background, my prior experience with sound bars, I started off with an LG, and then I think I had a Samsung sound bar that were very basic entry level. They were a 2.1 setup, so you had your sound bar with left and right and a little wireless sub, but they weren't anything really beefy. These were more kind of a $150 price range. And then a few years ago, I moved up to a Sony soundbar, the HT-CT380, which is more comparable to what we have here with the Bar 3.1, being that you had multiple audio channels, you had a little bit larger subwoofer, and even from a price point, the two are more similar. So that's just kind of a background on kind of what I've had in the past, and kind of sets the stage for what I was expecting here with the JBL product. Now, one thing I really like about the JBL is it has a JBL surround sound. Now, it does support Dolby as well, but the JBL surround I think is more of a kind of their branded take on surround sound. And there's a little button on the remote. You simply click the surround option, and it really just gives them a simulated surround. But the thing I love about it is, in the past, I have had products that had a similar setup, but they were always a little overdone. Essentially all you're doing is kind of tuning the equalizer of the sound. And in the past, those surrounds have been kind of overdone as far as echoey and that sort of thing. But the surround, JBL surround, I think they did a really good job of creating something that's authentic. It's not over the top. So it's kind of a balance between creating something that's too much and creating something that isn't really much of a change. But when you flip on that JBL surround, you do notice a real difference in kind of a spatial sound awareness, if that's the right term. Another thing I like is the support for different sound modes, and you have several options. You have your standard, you have a music, movie, voice. You have the last one I believe is a sport. And standard is exactly what you would expect it to be. It's just your standard audio. Music really isn't that big of a difference, so not really that helpful or useful for me. Movie, I think, is where the perfect spot is. It's a little bit more bass than you would get in standard, but not overdone. Voice is almost no bass, and I don't think that would be a very good choice for most folks. And the last one is sport, and it's almost too much bass. Now, if that's what you're looking for, then that's great. But for me, it's almost a little bit too overcooked. So movie is typically where I leave it. But again, you just simply click the sound mode button on the remote, and you can filter through those or flip through those and find one that you like. And the last piece, of course, is sound quality. And really, this does not disappoint. Again, I was coming from a Sony soundbar that was similar design, similar price. But I was really surprised at just how much the JBL kind of blew the Sony away. I had each of them set up on a table and would flip back and forth between each Bluetooth, And I mean, it was a noticeable difference with the Bar 3.1 as far as clarity. Just overall clarity was amazing on this one. You get really crisp highs, and no matter how loud you turn this thing up, and it will get insanely loud. I've yet to experience any distortion in the sound, so that's definitely a strong suit. And the bass blew the Sony away. I mean, this number one, this is kind of a big unit. I'll be honest with you, and you've got to kind of plan for where you're going to put it. But the good thing about the wireless subwoofers is, number one, of course, it's wireless, but number two, since the sound that it creates is it's not a directional sound, you can really just place it anywhere as long as it's able to connect the signal to the soundbar. So not a difficult thing to kind of work around that size, but it pays off, and it pays off big, because it really does create kind of the bass that I was used to as a teenager, with the big giant floor speakers. So very clear sound, very loud, very deep bass. I mean, it really does hit on all points when it comes to sound quality. My final thoughts for the JBL Bar 3.1. First final thought is I think I may have underestimated JBL. In my mind, up until a couple months ago, I really thought of them as more of an 80s or 90s company with, back when floor speakers were the thing. I kind of forgot about JBL. Maybe I just didn't pay attention. But about a month ago, you may have seen my review of the JBL Link series. They're smart speakers, Bluetooth speakers, and I was really blown away by just how good those were. So when they sent me the Bar 3.1, I was really curious to see if it would be just as surprising, and it really was. So I don't know what JBL is doing differently these days, but whatever they're doing, it's the right thing, because they're making really great products. The Bar 3.1 retails for $499, which you may think, well, that's kind of a lot for a soundbar. But the Bar series, they do have several options. There's a Bar Studio, which gets you the soundbar with no wireless sub, which I believe is $149. There's a Bar 2.1, kind of similar to this one. You've got a dedicated wireless sub. Output's a little less. It drops from 450 to 300 watts. And of course, you have two channels, hence the 2.1. But I'm sure it makes a pretty good sound, and if that's more your price range, it's $299, then that might be a good option. Then you have the 3.1, which we have here, and then the highest one on the food chain is the Bar 5.1, which is the same thing we have here. The only difference is there are two wireless speakers that connect on each end of the soundbar, and while they're connected, I'm assuming they charge up. You get 10 hours of use, but when you want a true surround sound, more cinematic effect, those speakers, little speakers on each end, you basically just unplug them from the soundbar, and then you can position those wherever you want in the background, so that you really do get a full surround sound, not just a kind of a simulated surround system. And the 5.1 retails for, I believe, $699. So again, you've got anything from $150 all the way up to almost $700. So plenty of options, and I'm sure whichever one you choose, you'll be happy with. I know, again, I've been very pleased, very surprised by the Bar 3.1, and I'm sure you will be too. So that's my review. I hope you found this useful. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please do leave those below. Otherwise, thanks for watching, guys.